The journey I want to take you through over the next 30-ish minutes, maybe 40 at the most, is what has been really a major growing process for me since I got into the business 20 years ago. And I know a lot of you are working right now and hustling to build your enterprises and build your teams and having conversations like, should I even do it? And I thought I would just kind of share a little bit about how that's all worked out for me over the last 20 years. I'll sort of fast forward to the present briefly, and then we'll go into the past and how it all came about. So Brandon Green again in Washington, D.C., and I am the CEO and founder of an organization called Chapter 2 Ventures, which is my new holding company. Just a couple years ago, I sold most of the interest that I had in a variety of brokerages and title companies and insurance and all kinds of different things because it was time for me to set out on another chapter of my career. And that was really quite a process, as you can imagine, because there's one thing about our industry that I know we can all relate to. This is very personal, right? We just get into it as much as our clients do. So even the idea 5 years ago that it was time for me to transition somehow brought up a lot of stuff. The one thing that it brought up for me that was most important, though, was how do I take 15, 20 years of goodwill and relationships and community building and move that into something that is new and energizing and passionate and cool for me, but also honors all of those relationships and all the skills and everything that I've done in the past. It's taken quite a bit of time to get there, though it's been quite a ride. So I'm going to share with you all the mistakes I made, and my hope is that you'll make a fewer maybe of those mistakes, although that's kind of how we learn. And it is in the context of building wealth. And how does this journey not only be a fulfilling one, but also be a really rewarding one financially? All right, so just briefly on some of my background, I was born in a very small mining town in Wyoming called Rock Springs. And I know there's 2 people in this room that have been to Rock Springs, but 3, all right, fantastic. So Rock Springs, Wyoming, southwest corner, trona mining. Anybody know what trona is? Yeah, it's all over the table, actually. It's used for making glass and all kinds of different stuff. There's very few trona mines in the world. But Rock Springs is a center of trona mining. And when I was 12, my dad decided he wanted to move the family to Iowa because he wanted to get a doctorate in education. Now, this was a really big deal. My dad came from a very large family in southwest Wyoming, all miners, and nobody graduated from high school. So the fact that my dad wanted to get his doctorate degree in education kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of what was going on in the family. And it wasn't a supported decision. It was like, you're leaving us? How could you do that? I mean, in hindsight now, I give him a lot of gratitude because he completely changed the trajectory of our family. And everybody has someone in their family tree that they can point to with a lot of gratitude around that. And for me, that's my father. All right, skipping ahead a little bit, I went to high school in Iowa, and I had this sense that college probably wasn't for me. So I ended up going on the road and touring with a musical organization called Up With People for a couple of years. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Up With People. I mean, okay, I can see a little thumbs up. Yeah, incredible organization. I got to see the world, and for the first time in my life, while I could see it through my dad, I could see it through myself, that something else was possible for me other than what I could see right around me in Iowa. So after 2 years of traveling the road and going broke and pretty deep into debt, I was like, I probably need to get a job. So I moved to the Baltimore area in 1999, and I found that real estate was kind of intriguing because it looked like maybe I could do it per an infomercial that I watched late one night. Exactly, super inspiring, right? Amos was talking about idea versus vision. That was an idea. A little bored, 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was the Carlton Sheets Buy Real Estate, No Money Down program. And there's something about a 2 a.m. offer that is particularly compelling, right? And you're a little bit vulnerable, like I can do it. I can do it. I too can be on the beach in 90 days with martinis and rich, right? Anyway, so yes, I bought the course and of course quickly realized that making money in real estate was a little bit more than the infomercial offered. However, it did teach me that by taking action in an inspired moment, even if it was 2 o'clock in the morning when I was feeling depressed, did have an impact, and it got me into real estate. And 2001 was my first full year, and I sold $12 million that year in real estate, which was quite a hustle because honestly, I had no choice. I had no trust fund, I had no college degree, and didn't have any other prospects, quite frankly. But I felt like I had a decent personality, And I kind of understood the sales contract, and I made it work. All right, so that's a brief early history. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the rest of my history through some stories. Oh, this is a good one. All right, so fast forward a little bit. I'm hustling in real estate and making it work as a solo practitioner, and had started to build a team. And in 2006-ish, something was going on in the market. For those that are the older 30 under 30, raise your hand. Do you remember what was going on in the market around 2006, 7, 8, right? I had been selling a really robust business of traditional buyers and sellers in Washington, D.C., working hard to increase my price point. I loved the fancier real estate, not the cheaper stuff. Like, that was where I was going, and then all of a sudden that wasn't available for me anymore. And so I decided that I would get into the real estate owned, the foreclosure space. So I eventually landed an account with Fannie Mae. It was one of the best days of my business life because all of a sudden all the traditional buyers and seller stuff had dried up. And if you were around at that time, you knew that by 2008 it was dry in a way that you never even imagined was possible. But now I had this flood of new listings coming in. First it was 5, then it was 10, and then it was 20, and then it was 30, and that was week 1. So I was like, wow, this is going to be great, right? I quickly realized, though, that I needed to build a lot more people in my organization to handle that kind of business because I only had a few people, and I ended up leveraging what I had at the time, which was a meager 401k and a couple really nice properties because you couldn't get a bank loan in 2008. And I put it all into that initiative. I was like, I see the light. I've got vision. We're going to build out a massive REO operation and sell real estate owned throughout Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, and we did. And it was quite a successful operation. One afternoon, after coming from Dallas and having a really great meeting with Fannie Mae where they're like, you're doing an amazing job, I flew to Austin where I was taking a class on how to be a better leader, which was desperately needed at that time, I assure you, and my phone rang. And it was the number of the main headquarters. And of course, if that's your biggest and pretty much your only client, because I had strategically decided to put all of my eggs in that basket, I answered the phone. And on the other line was a voice I didn't recognize. He said, yes, is this Brandon Green? I said, yes, this is. I'm calling to let you know that we're canceling your contract effective immediately. I was like, what? Like, at first I was like, joke's on me? Like, how is that possible? It's just a day after did I say something? So after talking with him briefly, of course, my first question was, well, what happened, right? And he goes, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Green, we can't tell you that. So I immediately hung up with him and I called my asset manager, who was my primary contact, still in disbelief. And she was crying. And if you knew this woman, you know she did not cry. Like, she was a hard-ass REO manager, right? She was like, kick him out by Friday. Like, I mean, a real tough lady, right? Which she had to be. And she was crying. She goes, I don't know what happened, but it's all over for you. Talk about tough words. Now, what she didn't know, but maybe she kind of did, is she could have been very right about that. Because at that point, I had leveraged about $1 million of my own personal stuff out on the line in order to grow that business. And if you've ever worked REO, you know that you have to put the money out to repair the properties and pay the utility bills, and then you get a reimbursement later. And by then I had 450 some odd listings in inventory in various stages. It's a lot of bills. It's a lot of bookkeeping. I didn't even know what was going on. So I went up to my hotel room and I threw up. And I called my sister, who was my operations manager at the time, and I'm crying at this point. I'm like, have you ever been at a point where you've been so overwhelmed, like you just have emotion, like there's nothing else there, and your body is just like driving it. So I'm crying and still sick to my stomach. I tell her what's happening, and I'll never forget, she's my sister, right? So I was looking for some words of wisdom and some, consoling maybe, and she goes, Brandon Green, you need to get your shit together. I was like, oh my God, you're right. She's like, There is no time for crying. And she was like, you need to call your attorney. So, I was like, what? I'm trying to dry my eyes, like, what is happening here? And so she's like, I've already downloaded the database, like, don't worry about it, right? So I ended up calling the attorney, and I could talk all afternoon about this process, but we've got more to talk about. That began a very difficult 1.5-year process of dealing with that issue and the $1 million in debt that I had as a result of that, the contract, the ambiguity of what even happened, let alone the pivoting and retooling of my entire business. And I learned a critical lesson in finance, amongst leadership and life and everything. And this was lesson number 1: accept your reality and love your circumstances as a key to move forward. Now, I'll tell you, it's very easy for me to put that on a PowerPoint right now. But in that moment, it was not easy for me to accept my reality, let alone love my circumstances. But I did 2 things that were critical that I see now in hindsight. I accepted the reality enough to know that I had to fire my whole staff immediately, which was no easy task, because I just built an incredible team. We were just celebrating the high of highs, many of which were really new. I loved and cared for these people, and I had to let them go within a couple days, because I would have bled to death from payroll almost immediately, right? So I accepted my reality, and I knew, especially as we started to get into the legal process, that in order for me to move forward, I needed to find the love and lessons in that circumstance and advance. Lesson number 1, accept your reality. All right, story number 2. So if you were to pay attention closely to my career, which I know nobody really has, but me, is like my career, and maybe James. Like James has been around for a long time, and I appreciate you, brother. My career has been one of sort of evolving and leveraging different things over about every 5 years. And so a mentor early on said, if you want to build a really big, ambitious life, right? And believe me, I was articulating the biggest and ambitious life you can imagine, right? He said, then I want you to start to think strategically, how do you build on top of different things? And how do you build it in such a way it doesn't exhaust you, right? Now, at that time, I wasn't sure I could ever hit an exhaustion point, right? I was like, just more, right? So I hadn't necessarily learned that lesson, but I did learn an important leverage lesson. I just kind of want to share a couple points with you of how I progressed it. So, there's like Brandon Green over here, a solo agent, hustling and door knocking. And then there's Brandon Green over here, and we've got a holding company, and we're launching a hotel, and we're doing all kinds of cool stuff. What happened along here? Well, actually what happened was I said, stage 1, sales practice. Build my sales skills. Took about 5 good years. Stage 2 for me was, okay, if I'm good at sales, do I want to be good at leadership? And what is the difference in those 2 skill sets? And I learned very, very quickly that how you lead is not how you sell, and vice versa. As a matter of fact, selling and leading can work against one another. Like there's some interesting nuances in that. So I took about 5 years to do that, and I built my sales team. Then I got into the brokerage business, and I was like, great. So how do I lead a small team and then lead a big team? The difference being like a speedboat for your team, and then I started getting into the brokerage business and launching multiple brokerage offices, and that was like a cruise ship, right? Couldn't turn anything very fast because everybody would like get sick on deck, right? So learning the skill set associated with that, and then eventually I realized, okay, if I leverage my skills and my time, and then I can leverage more of my time and people resources around me, how do I get to this next stage where I'm leveraging my time but also my financial resources now in order to build additional things? So in hindsight, I can see one of the critical lessons was leveraging into opportunities. Leveraging, if you do it right, manifests bigger and bigger opportunities. So I didn't go from like hustling and selling houses to a holding company. Right? It was really a staged process, sometimes purposeful, often with a lot of luck. But in hindsight, I can see now it was building on my different skills along the way and acknowledging and questioning that if I want to go to this next level, what does that mean around the skill set, the way my life needed to be organized, and how could I do that in a way that still fundamentally held to my core values of freedom, flexibility, and time off, right? So element number 2, leverage your opportunities thoughtfully and strategically. All right. So we're building the team, and along the way, I really was able to recruit some incredible people. And one of the women I was able to recruit was, I would say, in all these years, like my best-selling partner, right? One of those people that you know shows up for your client just like you. And you don't have to explain anything to them. Like they just get you, you get them, and they deliver the same type of service that you do to your client, and nobody has to say a word. Later I learned, you got to document that stuff in order to get to, but she was that person I didn't have to document anything. Hardly even had to say something. I'd go out of town, I'd be like, Jamie, here's the file. Boom. No questions asked. So one day she said, Brandon, I want to take you to lunch. Okay. Right? There was a tone to it that made me a little bit nervous. So we go to lunch, and she said, I want to let you know that I'm leaving the team. Now, I've had a lot of people leave the team over the years, but she was a particularly difficult one to leave because I asked her, I said, why are you leaving the team? And she said to me, she leaned over in a really sort of direct manner and in a way that she knew would really get to my heart. She said, because you've abandoned me. Now, my first reaction was, I'm not your father. Like, I was like, that seems really severe and sort of maybe even a little tiny bit inappropriate. But what she was saying was actually very true, that relationship, as I'd gone on to build a lot of other things, I had abandoned that relationship. And in that moment, I saw both that lesson in the moment, but I also saw the pattern that had appeared in my life. And that pattern was that pretty much up until then, everybody who left my organization was pretty pissed off at me and didn't want to talk to me ever again. So I was like, what is that? And it brought me to my element number 3, which is changing bad habits that are holding you back. And the bad habit that I had was not clearly communicating to people that were important to me the vision of where we were going, how that could potentially impact them, and where I was in that process. For those that are really, really critical to me, I would just go, right? And assume that people knew that we were on this big, bold journey. And the result was people resented me and that journey when they left because they felt like I was just leaving them in the dust. And the truth is, I kind of was. Change things that are holding you back. All right, number 4. And this is a real new one, new lesson. All right, so I told you a little bit about this hotel I'm developing briefly. It's really cool. You got to go to stonycreekfarm.com, STONEY creekfarm.com. One of the complicated things about this particular property, it's 66 acres in rural Maryland, beautiful, right? We're going to build out a boutique agritourism resort. One of the big challenges there is we have to get the zoning changed. So I worked for 2 years, 18, 19 into 20, preparing the zoning packet, working with all the lawyers and the engineers and so forth, and I had an incredible packet. Let me tell you, nobody has submitted such a clean zoning packet. So we submit the zoning packet about this time last year for the public hearing, which was scheduled for January of 2021. So I get to the public hearing. By now it's Zoom, right? It's a Zoom public hearing. And it's a Zoom public hearing and nobody on the screen. It's only audio. And I saw like my attorney and a few people like pop up on as speakers. And then I started to see all these other names popping up as designated speakers in the zoning hearing. I'm like, well, this is interesting. Who are all these wonderful people coming out to talk about my project? So we get into the project a little bit, talking about it, and then the speakers start. And it became a 2.5-hour beatdown. If you ever want to feel better about yourself, I encourage you to Google Washington County zoning hearing, Brandon Green, January 2021 rather. It was horrible, miserable. I was so excited about the vision we had for transformation in the community, And one by one by one, our neighbors showed up and said terrible things about me personally, even though I'd not met them, the project, what we were going to do to ruin their community, all these lies, untruths, and for 2.5 hours, I just had to stand there in my home office on Zoom with no video and listen to it. Brutal. Brutal. I'm still recovering. But I learned a really, really valuable lesson. A lot of lessons in that. And that is, number 4 here is harvest at the right time. Timing is everything. I went into the zoning room ready to harvest the goodwill of the county and get my project approved. But it was all wrong in terms of timing. I hadn't done the work in the community to make that work. I went in early. Not only was it a terrible time politically in this country to be proposing anything controversial, which I didn't even know the project would be. Remember, this was right before January 6th. Everything was super tense, so that was terrible timing. But I had also not met anybody in the community truly. I was just focused on my project, right? So really, really important lesson about harvesting at the right time. Are we being thoughtful about when we're giving and then when we're receiving? When are we giving back and then when are we asking? And so for the last many months, I've been spending 3 or 4 days a week in that community, meeting all the farmers, meeting all of the entrepreneurs, meeting the neighbors and talking, and we're going to resubmit that application in about 2 months. But this time with 100 to 200 letters of support and people who are going to show up and articulate back to the Zoning Commission why my project is so important for them. And my idea now is turned into a vision because I'm harvesting at the right time. I believe. Stay tuned because it hasn't happened yet. And anything could still happen. So harvest at the right time. The financial part of this is a huge balance sheet activity, right? Since we're talking about sort of building this financial world, if I do this well, it's going to be a huge impact for the community at large. But just getting the zoning changed on a property can dramatically increase the value of that property and all the properties around it. So there's so much into this project that I'm thinking a lot right now about harvesting at the right time. All right, a couple other quick ones here. Efficiency, establish systems, create systems and automation. As we were growing the offices, 1 office was no problem. 2 offices, a little tight, a little busy, but we got it. We got to 3 offices and the whole thing started falling apart. Right? We did not have the systems for communication. I'll give you a brief example about that, right? My systems for communication with 2 offices was like wandering around talking to people. Hey, And then 3 offices, I was like, wow, that's a lot of traveling. And if you know the DC area, like Office 1 was in downtown DC, Office 2 was like out in Fairfax, and then we had Stafford, Virginia. These are very long geographic areas, so I couldn't do that anymore. We didn't have any systems for communication, let alone financial management. We went from 1 person handling our finances to like 4, right? So as you're growing your enterprise, I want you to think about efficiency and establishing systems. They're not as complicated as you think. Anything that you are doing more than once or having to talk to people about more than once, consider you need to document it and make it happen. Cyrus had a really good one actually about documenting onboarding and training systems in our Mastermind. You have, 600 videos that you've created? That's a great example of a system. All right, so next one is mindfulness. So let me go back to the Fannie Mae component of things. So in addition to that just being a real disaster on so many levels legally, it was a huge disaster financially, and I was teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. And what I noticed in all of that is that, I had a terrible bookkeeping system. I mean, it didn't really even exist, let's be honest. I had a poor bookkeeper who was trying to keep up with all these transactions, and I didn't know anything. And so as I was climbing out of that mess, I had a lot of blame for her. A lot. I also had a lot of blame for my CPA, who simultaneously, we were going through a multi-year IRS audit, right? So I was like, well, that's a lot of your fault too, right? And I had a lot of blame for my financial planner, who clearly forgot to steer me from this gigantic hole I was about to fall in. So I had a great conversation with a mentor who was not a paid coach, although I had a lot of paid coaches, but it was that mentor right over a glass of wine. He's like, Sounds like there's one person that's the common person in this entire room. Have you considered taking responsibility for everything? And I was like, sure, except for all the stuff I'm not responsible for. Right? And he's like, yeah. Is this playing back to you yet? And he taught me a really important lesson there around growing my finances in particular, is if I was going to become wealthy like I wanted to become and see the vision I had, I needed to take full responsibility for absolutely everything in my financial world, even if I wasn't touching it. And that is a daily lesson, ladies and gentlemen, right? When an assistant messes up, or I had a bookkeeper who put an extra zero on that check, that stuff really has a big impact. But mindfulness and taking responsibility in everything has been a really, really big win. Speaking of taking responsibility for everything, my next one. So this was just a handful of years ago. So we had an agent on the team who had a great listing in Georgetown, D.C. Anybody been to Georgetown, D.C.? Few people. Yeah, it's a really nice neighborhood, right? And she's like, this is a fantastic listing. And she did a little coming soon sign the day before, or something. Looks like a Friday, open house was on a Sunday. She got a sign call, right, from somebody who's like, hey, I'm not represented. I'm really interested in the house. I'd like to come and see it tomorrow. And like a lot of agents, she's like, oh, do you have an agent? No, I don't want one. I'm an attorney. I don't need one. She's like, oh, all right. She sort of did that calculation in her head. Those are always wild cards. That's going to work or not work. But she's like, okay, I'll show you the house. So she goes out, shows the house, and she's like, one thing, just one thing. Like we're finishing up the little renovation. It'll be ready for Sunday. It'd be great if you did not go upstairs because there's no railing and it's a little. He's like, don't worry about it. I'm fine, right? So he goes upstairs. She goes into the kitchen. And she hears thud, 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 thud. Comes out, and this poor guy is like spread out at the bottom of the stairs. It's clear that he has fallen down the stairs that had no railing. So she's like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, can I call an ambulance? And he's like, gets up, and he's like, no, I'm fine, and sort of limps his way out the door. So she called me. She's like, hey, we just had an incident in the house. Great, did you try to get in touch with him? Yes, what happened? She told me the story. She filed a police report, could never reach the guy. 2 years later, right before the statute of limitations was expired, she got sued, I got sued, the brokerage got sued, unrelated entities got sued, like everybody got sued, right? We litigated that thing for a year. Now, what's really interesting about it is some of the parties involved had purchased an extra liability policy above and beyond E&O, because E&O doesn't cover slip and fall stuff. Like, you need to have another professional liability policy. I had one. She had one. A couple other people involved did not have them. That thing cost 6 figures to get rid of, and it really brought to my presence yet another important lesson financially, is that we have to invest in managing the downside of our business. And we don't like to talk about this a lot as entrepreneurs, right? Because it's all about opportunity. But the reality is there is actually a lot of downside in our business. And I don't like to spend time thinking about downside per se. So the way I transfer that is I think about investing in the down and managing the risk around the downside, which could just practically be a lot about insurance and policies and procedures. But for those younger in the 30 under 30 crowd, it's just a matter of time. If you do well, you're going to be sued. Right? I hear a few chuckles from some of the older folks. You're doing really well, Brad. Yes, exactly. So financially, I want you to think about, are you managing the downside? In many ways, that's really about insurance. But I'll tell you, that has hit home on a number of occasions in our organization. All right, so my final, there we go. Yeah, 2 more. And this speaks a little bit to what Tara was saying. As my enterprise really began to grow, I realized that it was really important that I stop doing things. And there were a couple things I stopped doing over the last few years. One is I realized I'm not a great systems builder. Like, that's just not my gift zone. I am really good, though, at hiring people. And so hiring systems builders has been something that I've been awesome at. I also have learned that while I'm really, really good at working with buyers and sellers and investors, that's not what is my highest and best use at this point in my career. So I've stopped working with buyers and sellers and investors. That was the hardest thing ever. But what it has allowed me to do has been to grow and build all kinds of interesting new things. So I would just challenge you to ask yourself, as we're in late afternoon, you've got a lot of really great ideas. But chances are you're already pretty busy and you're not going to be able to fit new ideas in there. So for every new idea you want to implement, what's the one thing that you're going to stop doing at the same time? All right, and then my 9th one here, building a great financial world, business partnerships. So I've had 2 really tremendous business partnerships over the years. And I know that, like, business partnerships kind of get a bum rap, right? I've had a really great experience with them. One partnership was with a guy that was, this was the guy that was my partner in the bed and breakfast, which we're now converting into the boutique hotel. So we bought that together in 2006 on a handshake. And we had a tremendous business partnership until I bought him out just last year. It was so rewarding to know that, hey, we went all that time from 2004 to 2020 on a handshake and lots of conversations, right? The other incredible partnership I've had is with a man named Bo Minkiti. Some of you know him. He's a 30 under 30. Right, we got into the brokerage business together in 2006 and built a lot of stuff and still have a variety of things together. If you know me and you know Bo, you know we are 2 very different human beings. But it worked really, really well, still does today. Not to say things haven't been tense or there haven't been difficulties, but I want you to think that, honestly, together, not alone, is the path to building a great life and to building a great financial world. You don't have to journey on your own. As a matter of fact, if you can find a really talented human being to come into your world in some sort of partnership capacity, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. Like it's like a lot more than that. So my partnership with Bo is an example of that. And by the way, partnerships don't have to always take the form of equity arrangements. Sometimes great partnerships are employee relationships. I'll give you an example here recently. I recently hired a new chief of staff. I hired him in early in the year. His name is Shane Feldman. He's incredibly successful in his own right. Built an international platform for himself. And he came on board as my chief of staff in I guess it was March or April. Completely changed what was possible for me in a fairly short period of time. Because I'm always thinking now, what's the partnership look like here? Because I know that my capacity to launch something new is limited, and I need to make sure that I bring other people along the way so that my thing, my vision becomes their thing and their vision, and so that every few years we're able to continue to grow. So a couple next steps, a couple things, and an ask for everybody today. So as part of my holding company, I've launched an education and training platform focused on money to start with. We're going to build out a lot of other things. It's called the Alchemy Labs. We're going to build out the Alchemy of Leadership and the Alchemy of Communication and all kinds of fun stuff we've got mapped out. I've got a whole team that's working right now behind the scenes. The very first thing, though, that we did launch is the Alchemy of Money for real estate entrepreneurs because of my personal torturous experience building my financial world, crashing and burning, and then rebuilding it to where I am today. And so I would love for you guys, if you get a chance, to take a look at 30under30vip.com for a couple things. One, if you put your name and email in there, I'm going to send you my Millionaire Planner. And by the way, I don't have a bunch of ClickFunnels and all that. We don't have any of that set up yet. We've got the Millionaire Planner, which is awesome. That's 100% free. I would love for you to join the journey and come into our community. You can follow me on Instagram at Brandon A. Green. And then if there's anybody in the room that's struggling with their finances, and by the way, I don't necessarily mean struggling as in on the verge of bankruptcy like I was. A lot of people are actually struggling in that they're making so much money, they don't know what to do with it. And it's just disorganized. So I've got a course called the Alchemy of Money for real estate agents. It's awesome. And I put everything I know in there. I've been doing a lot of coaching on financials, and I decided to build out a course and a community. And what I'm super excited about, and I think a couple people might be doing this in their own world as well, I've launched an investment fund so that the people that are part of the Alchemy of Money community also get access to really cool investments in the hospitality business and in commercial real estate. So I'm on a mission to create lots and lots of millionaires within the real estate business, because I know an elephant in the room is I'm not alone in my journey with the IRS, or later in my journey of organization and figuring out I've got a P&L, but what does it say? Like, I don't even know. Or I've done well, but I don't know what to invest in. Is it NFTs or crypto or a boring mutual fund, right? So we tackle all of that in the course. So would love for you to come into my world through 30under30vip.com. And of course, as a gift, we discounted it to everybody today by $500, and we'd love to have you be part of it. So as a conclusion, I want to make sure that we think of a couple things. One is, I love this quote, "You're an alchemist. Make gold of that." And I like this word a lot because I think it speaks to what we all have, which is that little magic dust that we can sprinkle on things and make things work at just the right moment in time. When we can turn that client around who's frustrated to being excited. When we can retain that agent who's about to walk out the door. We all have that je ne sais quoi, if you will, where we can pull people in at just the right time. Consider that you're all an alchemist in everything that you do, and anything is truly possible. My story is a story of that. So thank you for allowing me to say a few things today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Wayne Solomons.